Hi, I'm Ralph Preston, and we're doing another Stroke Buddies Stroke Survivor Support Group meeting. And today we're lucky to have Declan McLaren, who's a postgraduate student at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. And he's been doing a bit of studying on sleep. And sleep is a very important thing in all of life, and it's something that stroke survivors often struggle with post-stroke. So I'm not doing the presentation, so I'll let Declan take it away.
Great, thank you very much, Ralph. Thank you for that. Yeah, so as Ralph mentioned, I'm completing my PhD at the University of Glasgow just now. And the research team that I'm part of is a collaboration between myself and other researchers at the University of Glasgow, researchers at the University of Edinburgh as well, and the UK Stroke Association, who are helping us with recruitment and making sure that all our materials and our research is accessible to stroke survivors as well. So the team that I'm part of is interested in improving sleep after a stroke, specifically looking at post-stroke insomnia. ILS is the kind of acronym that we go by. And I'll talk today, in fact, I'll move on to the next slide and discuss that. I'll talk today at the very end a bit about our research, but I'll start with what sleep is. We need to kind of get that off the ground, the stages of sleep that we'll go through every night, why we sleep, or some ideas. We'll touch briefly on why it is that we've evolved to sleep, and then we'll go on to talk about what can happen when sleep doesn't quite go as planned, and we can talk about insomnia, insomnia after a stroke. And I'll talk about some tips on how to get better at sleep as well, and what the research suggests before, I'll talk about our research. So obviously there's lots of different conditions that we could talk about that can impact sleep. I'm just going to focus specifically on insomnia because it's my area of expertise. I'm not as well read on other conditions. So we'll talk about that mostly today. And unfortunately, this image of Homer here isn't what being a sleep researcher means. We don't get to sleep that often, but it would be lovely to spend most of the day in bed and say that I'm doing research, but that's not the case, unfortunately. So let's start off. What is sleep? Another little funny meme. I'm sure we've all felt like this at some point. We've maybe not had the best night of sleep before. We get home after work or after just an eventful day, and we're like desperate to crawl under the covers. The thing is, for many people, as we'll come on to talk with as we talk about insomnia, the bed can actually be a source of anxiety, even if they're not aware of it, because they've spent so much time worrying about not getting the right amount of sleep, or not getting the right kind of sleep, or not getting good quality sleep. And this kind of worry and the associations that we can make between anxiety and the bed or the bedroom can contribute to insomnia. And we'll talk about that a bit later on. So one thing that's for certain is that sleep's incredibly important for virtually every function and process that the body goes through. This quote here from a paper by Michael Gradner and Fernandez in 2021, sleep is a non-negotiable biological state required for the maintenance of human life. Our need for sleep parallels those for air, food, and water. So that makes no apologies in stressing how important sleep is for a healthy and productive life. It's essential for virtually every process in the body, a biological process, psychological processes, and our cognitive well-being as well. But in reality, what sleep is, or what is sleep, is quite a complicated question for which there's many different answers. The answer that you get would likely be different depending on who you ask as well, depending on what field of science, for example, that they're in. A biologist will have a different answer to a psychologist, will have a different answer to a psychiatrist, to a neuroscientist, to a neurologist. And it's also important to distinguish how, to have an answer that distinguishes how we can recognize sleep that's being different from a coma, or being different from being hypnotized or under anesthetic, or from being knocked unconscious, or just from being in a very, very relaxed state. And so a clear and agreed upon definition is important, particularly in science, as we need to know that when we're talking about sleep, we're all talking about the same thing. We're all measuring the same thing. And if there's two studies that are looking at sleep, we're not comparing apples and oranges. It's important that we know we're discussing the same thing. So there's lots and lots of definitions out there. This is one that I particularly like. Again, from the paper by Grander and Fernandez in 2021. And there is a bit of jargon in it. It is a bit complicated, but I'll break it down. And so they say that sleep is a naturally occurring reversible state of perceptual disengagement with reduced consciousness and relative immobility, the propensity of which is patterned by homeostatic and circadian factors. So I know that's a bit wordy, but we'll break it down. So one thing that's important is that it's naturally occurring and it's rhythmic. It occurs every night. There's usually a pattern. You usually have a sleep-wake pattern of a time that you go to sleep and a time that you wake up. It's not like being under general anaesthetic, which there's not a pattern to, hopefully anyway, or being knocked unconscious, or it's occurs naturally every day and every morning at roughly the same time. It's reversible. So again, that distinguishes sleep from something like being knocked unconscious or being in a coma. Even if someone's in a very, very deep sleep, you are able to shake them awake, you're able to wake them up, even if they wake up a bit confused. And there's perceptual disengagement and reduced consciousness, and these are kind of similar, but generally you're not aware of what's happening around you in your room or wherever you're asleep, or certainly less so than when you're awake. You may hear some noises when you're asleep, and can sometimes take part of your dreams. So if a car drives past your window, for example, you might incorporate that into your dream if at that particular time you're dreaming, but you're generally less aware of your surroundings than when you're awake. You also have reduced movement. There are obvious exceptions to this, things like sleepwalking or jerking your legs throughout the night, but you do have relative immobility throughout whilst you're asleep, and we'll come on to why that's important as well. So you might move a little bit, but you're not running marathons, you're not performing athletic competitions when you're asleep. You're in a relaxed posture as well. You're usually lying down or maybe sitting. It's unlikely that you would be asleep standing up, or you would fall down. You would not be standing up for very, very long. And we'll come on to next the homeostatic and the circadian factors. But the key thing to understand with these, although they are quite big confusing words, is that these are essentially just the biological processes that are involved in regulating sleep and govern when you fall asleep and when you wake up. And they can be pretty well characterized by these plots here, by these graphs here. So your sleep drive, or your homeostatic sleep drive, is to give it a Sunday name. Put simply, just means that the longer you're awake, the sleepier you are. Think about this big, long scientific definition. It is an increasing propensity for sleep with increasing durations of wakefulness. But yeah, the longer you're asleep, the longer you're awake, the more likely you are to fall asleep. It's similar to hunger. The longer you go without eating food, the hungrier that you are. Sleep's a similar process, just governed by different hormones. You can think of it as an elastic band as well. You can stretch out an elastic band and stretch and stretch and stretch, but at some point it snaps. That point that it snaps is kind of similar to falling asleep. Your homeostatic sleep drive is one of the chemicals that is involved in this in your brain is called adenosine. We'll come on to adenosine a little bit more when we're talking about coffee later on. I guess excuse me, my dog's interrupting. We'll come on to talk about that a little bit more later on. But adenosine, what happens in the morning is very, very low, hardly any in your brain at all. And the longer you're awake, the more it builds up in your brain, to the point that it reaches a threshold and at some point you have to fall asleep, because this chemical is telling you it's time to go to sleep. Your circadian rhythms, so this second kind of plot here, you'll see they both have the time along the bottom, so that's an important thing as well, to kind of see where these correspond with each other and link up. But your circadian rhythm, so if you've ever stayed awake all night, you've had an all-nighter, you may have noticed that as it starts to get to morning time, although you felt very sleepy before that, as it starts to get to the morning, you begin to feel more awake. You start to feel slightly more awake and alert. And this is because it's not just your sleep drive that's controlling your sleep. You also have these circadian rhythms, these natural rhythms that peak and trough throughout the day, that follow a roughly 24-hour cycle. So as the morning comes around, even though you've not fallen asleep, your body's starting to say, right, it's time to wake up, even despite the fact that you've not fallen asleep. So what you really want is for these two processes to, at a certain point in time, align with each other and match up. So on this graph here, it tends to look around about 11 p.m. is where this person's fallen asleep. So their sleep drive is increased then, but you also see the circadian rhythm is starting to suggest it's time to go to bed more and more throughout the night as well. So to have a kind of good, healthy sleep pattern schedule, you want these to be aligned quite well. People who, for example, have lost their vision and can't process light, so they've had a complete kind of they're getting no light input into their brain. Ordinarily, for people who have normal vision, light would be the main factor that aligns your circadian rhythms, that sets it in time. For people who can't process light, they still have circadian rhythms, but what tends to happen is every maybe few months or every few weeks, they have kind of patterns of temporary insomnia. And what's happened there is the circadian rhythm has just kind of fallen out of sync because it's not been brought back in with light, because our circadian rhythms are slightly longer than 24 hours long. So every now and then, because they're not having the daily exposure to light to bring it back into sync, they're just falling out of sync a little bit. Because it's controlled by other things as well, like food and eating and socializing and so on. They're controlled, your circadian rhythm is controlled by a very small part of your brain. Its very complicated name is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, but you can think of it just as the body's master clock. And it's tiny. It has about 20,000 neurons in it, which sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of the brain and how many neurons you have in your brain, it's a very, very small part of the brain, but very, very, very important. And it's located in what's called the hypothalamus, which is a part of the brain that maybe some people have heard of. But there's various areas all across the brain that are important for different parts of sleep. So your master clock, your suprachiasmatic nucleus, is linked directly to your eyes because it gets light signals directly inputted from the eyes to this part of the brain. So much so that there's an argument put forward by some that the eyes, or at least parts of the eyes, should be considered as part of the brain, because they link right up. And so depending on how much light there is at different times of the day, this part of your brain tells other parts of your brain to release more or less of a chemical called melatonin. Some people might have heard of melatonin. You can sometimes get it over the counter, although there's not a lot of evidence that suggests that taking it over the counter can actually help with sleep. And a lot of the things that you buy over the counter, when they've done kind of random tests on them, don't have even close to the amount of melatonin that they say that they have. So you have to be very, very careful when taking that. So ideally what you want, if you're looking at these graphs, is for the levels of melatonin that are increasing throughout the day, telling you it's perhaps time to go to sleep, to align with your sleep drive as well. So the two chemicals we've discussed, adenosine and melatonin, you want them to meet at a point where they have quite a high volume each, and then you'll naturally fall asleep. And this clock, this master clock that we're talking about, exists in every animal that we're aware of, and there's even some evidence to suggest that it exists in some plants or some fungi as well, which suggests that it evolved very, very, very early on in history, and has, as it is so important, has survived throughout all this time as well. So moving on from that a little bit, what is sleep, or what specifically are the stages of sleep? Because sleep is not just a binary on-off process. It is a process with lots of different stages, like other things in the body. It's divided up into what's called REM sleep. So you may have heard of that, rapid eye movement sleep, and non-REM sleep. Now, the majority of your night is spent in non-REM. But when you're awake, so if you were connected up to an EEG machine, when you're awake and you're alert and you're playing energy, you're not feeling tired, your brain releases what's called beta brain waves. As you start to get slightly more sleepier, they change to alpha brain waves. And as you fall asleep, the first stage of sleep is stage 1. This is very, very light sleep. It's the first stage after falling asleep. And you don't spend a whole lot of time in this. You maybe only spend around 7 minutes or so on average in this. Your brain waves, your heart rate, your eye movement all begin to slow down as you're starting to fall, as you have fallen asleep, but you're getting towards deeper sleep. You might twitch a little bit. Sometimes when you're falling asleep, you can sometimes wake yourself up by twitching, like kicking a leg out or something, or your bed partner might kick you and claim that they're in stage 1 sleep and they're not just trying to get a little kicking because you annoyed them earlier in the afternoon. But this stage of sleep is non-rapid eye movement sleep as well. From stage 1, you move into stage 2, and this is still light sleep, but it occurs before deep sleep. Most of the time, I actually don't know. Yeah, sorry. Most of the time that you spend asleep is spent in stage 2. Your brain waves are continuing to slow as you get into stage 2, but they look on the output of an EEG very similar to stage 1, but you have these real big spikes of electricity, which are called sleep spindles or K complexes sometimes. And your body temperature decreases as well. So in order to fall asleep, your body temperature has to decrease by about 2 to 3 degrees. And it decreases further as you get into stage 2 sleep. And your heart rate and your muscles slow down and relax. And yeah, most of the time in the night is spent in stage 2. Stage 3 is what you call deep sleep. Here, your brainwaves slow right down. They're mostly what's called delta waves. And this is the sleep that is restorative. This is the real important sleep for repairing your cells, for if you've had a stroke, to allow the brain a chance to repair the parts of the brain that have been damaged by the stroke. And the body in the first half of the night, you spend more time in stage 3 than you do in the second half, as you're starting to kind of wake up in the morning. And that can be linked up with your circadian rhythm kind of graph. At this stage of sleep, it can be very difficult to wake someone up. And if you do, they may wake up and be very confused and not know where they are, may seem a bit kind of delusional. There's lots of funny videos of people online being shaken awake and giving them a phone, but it's a lamp or some silly object, but they're talking to it. That's because they've woken up in a very deep stage, a very deep sleep, and they're confused when they wake up. This stage of sleep is getting enough time in this stage of sleep is vital to be able to wake up the next day and feel alert and feel focused and feel like you've had a restorative sleep and be able to take on complex tasks and so on. It's also very, very important for memory consolidation as well. So if you're learning new skills or if you're learning new information, this part of sleep is where your brain goes through and encodes it all and tries to encode it into your long-term memory. Finally, we have REM sleep, and this is rapid eye movement sleep. This is the part of sleep where you dream, where your imagination is going rapid. Your brain in this stage is similar to when it's awake, but luckily for us and luckily for our bed partners, any muscle movement is completely immobilized, or specifically voluntary muscle movement. So a different part of the brain controls things like breathing or swallowing. So we can still do that unless you have some different sleep disorders that we're not going to talk about today, but some other sleep disorders can be affected by that. But the point of this is voluntary movements are completely immobilized. It's called muscle atonia, and that's so that you're not acting out your dreams. So when you have the dream that you're running away from a German Shepherd, you're not flailing your arms about and hitting the person next to you. Luckily for them. But other some disorders, so there's other disorders like sleepwalking, for example, can result in the body failing to reach its muscle atonia, and you may get up and act out dreams. And it can be really funny to see some of the videos, but it can be really distressing for the person, in particular the person who they're sleeping beside. At this part of your sleep, your breathing is kind of faster and irregular. And this part is also very, very important for memory consolidation as well, specifically memories that have an emotional connection. And interestingly, you're more likely to be able to recall a memory if there is an emotional attachment to it as well. Throughout both of these stages, so stage 3 and stage 4, so deep sleep and rapid eye movement sleep, your body's repaired, and your brain does a kind of cleanse. It does a wash. So your brain's washed in cerebral spinal fluid, CSF, and this takes away all of the kind of rubbish and the gunk that you've built up throughout the day. So that adenosine, for example, that we spoke about, but some other kind of waste chemicals that are commonly found in things like dementia and so on. So there is a link between insomnia or impaired sleep and the development of dementia. And it may be, I don't think there's causal evidence to suggest this, but it may be that it's because the brain, the chemicals in the brain that are built up through the day, the kind of waste products aren't being cleared away effectively. So sleep is very, very important for these stages of sleep, for making sure your brain's cleansed of all the waste products that we don't need. And that's what contributes to the next day being awake and being alert and being cognitively able to complete tasks that might be difficult and think through difficult problems and so on. Generally, so also just to add as well, so in this stage of your sleep, your body releases hormones that promote bone growth and muscle repair and so on as well. So these are important times for repairing your body. Generally, one full cycle, so going from stage 1 through to REM, takes 90 minutes. But that's not uniform, that's just an average. So it's not the same across the night, but generally an average about 90 minutes. So you go through about 4 or 5 complete cycles of this and every evening. But the order is usually stage 1, then 2, then 3, then 2, then REM, and then back to 2, and then it repeats. You don't go back to light sleep every single time. And you don't generally go back to it until you're starting to wake up. So that's what sleep is, but it doesn't answer the question of why do we bother doing it. The short answer is we don't know why we do it, not for certain yet anyway. There's a few different theories, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that if we were at one time cavemen running about in the desert trying not to get eaten by tigers or whatever else is out there, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be asleep for 8 hours of the day, because whilst we're asleep, we're not completing the 4 F's of survival: feeding, fighting, fleeing, or, to give it its more appropriate term, mating. We're not doing this while we're asleep, so we're not completing these behaviours that are evolutionary advantageous, which suggests that if it has existed for so long, and if the structures in the brain we expect are very, very, very old because they exist in essentially all life on Earth, sleep must be evolutionarily very important. So pretty much, yeah, every animal that we've studied sleeps in some regard for different durations. I mean, you'll see on this chart on the right here, we on average sleep about 8 hours. A giraffe, interestingly, is less than 2 hours, so doesn't spend much time asleep at all, whereas a bat is asleep for most of the day, so just about 4 hours of awake time of activity from a bat. There are a few possible exceptions to animals that don't sleep. There's some species of fish, I think, in South America somewhere, that live in a cave and are blind and don't get any input of light. They may not sleep, but I expect they probably do. It just maybe looks different to how other animals sleep. I'm not sure. But yeah, whilst they're asleep, we're very vulnerable to predators, to enemies from different tribes. So the fact that it's persisted means that it's obviously very, very important. There's a few theories, evolutionary theories, as to why it may have persisted. I'll go through a couple of them today. There are more, but the first is inactivity theory. The suggestion is that whilst we're asleep, we're out of harm's way. We're not getting into fights. We're not falling off of cliffs. We're not running into saber-toothed tigers. We're generally in one place, usually somewhere safe, in a cave or up a tree or somewhere we're not likely to be attacked. So that may suggest as to why it persisted, because those people who did it back in the day were more likely to pass on their genes. But again, it would make more sense to still be awake and just not moving. So that maybe only kind of partly explains it. Another is energy conservation theory. So you burn less calories, you use less energy when you're asleep. So you would then need less food to survive. So you'd be more likely to survive and more likely to pass on your genes. Another is, or there's several that comprise this, but the restorative theories, which make sense from what we spoke about before, is that when we're asleep, the body repairs itself and rejuvenates itself. Much of the processes that occur in the body, like growth and making protein synthesis, occur mostly or exclusively when we're asleep. So it may suggest that is an advantage, that we do that whilst we're asleep. And also it helps clear the waste products out of the brain. So we're going to be more alert, we're going to be more cognitively capable the next day, more likely to come up with a solution to a problem or something. And that's similar to the final one. That's a more recent theory, which is the brain plasticity theory. And it suggests that sleep may help with brain development, with the creation of new neurons in the brain, as well as repairing neurons in the brain. And we see that sleep deprivation in adults and children as well impairs the ability to learn and complete cognitive tasks. And if it comes down to survival, if we're back in the Serengeti, the evolutionary early stages of humans, being able to come up with a new way to use a tool, or a new way to hunt an animal, or a new way to run away from an animal, coming up with solutions to these things, might have been the difference between life and death. And it may have been the difference between you passing on your genes and contributing to evolution and not doing so. So there's a few different theories, but the main takeaway is that it's very, very important to us now and throughout evolutionary history. And that one kind of main function of sleep that persists for these all is that it clears the waste products that have built up in our brain throughout the day. One thing that can often cause a lot of anxiety for people is how much sleep should I be getting versus how much I am getting. And it's probably no surprise to most people that to see that babies and infants need much more sleep than adults do. And part of that is because they are creating all these new pathways in their brain and need lots of time to create lots of neurons in their brain and develop their brain. And sleep's so important for that. But often what can happen is, as we slightly get older, we have in our head, we hear of what the guidelines for sleep are, and we think, I don't get 9-10 hours sleep. I don't get enough sleep. And people can be really worried about that. What can happen, I mean, you see on the chart here, as you get to a young adult, 18, 25 years old, all the way up to 65 plus, there isn't a whole lot of change in how much sleep you should be getting, or what is recommended that you get. But what can happen as people get older is, although the need for sleep doesn't change, so as you start to get into the kind of 65 plus age group, the need for sleep doesn't change, so you still need the same amount. But what happens is, if we think back to the circadian graph chart that we had before, it can move slightly forward. It's got a phase advanced shift. So your body may then be saying, okay, we need to get to sleep at 7 or 8 o'clock, or 8 or 9 o'clock, whereas previously you would have gone to bed at 10 or 11 or midnight even. And this is just a natural change that occurs as people get older. But what can happen is people have habits, people have responsibilities, people have TV programs that come on at 9 o'clock that they want to watch. So they don't go to bed when their body's telling them to. So despite maybe having a bedtime, a biological bedtime of 7 or 8 p.m. and a wake time of kind of 3 or 4 a.m., they may just stick to their habits, that what they've been used to before. And what can happen then, and this is seen quite often, is around 3 or 4 in the morning, as your body's starting to say, right, it's time to wake up, you then have disrupted sleep, but you've only gone to bed 4 hours ago, or 3 or 4 hours ago. But your body's telling you it's time to wake up. So when you're trying to get back to sleep after that, people often report that from 3, 4 in the morning, they have disrupted sleep right up until their awake time of 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. And for them, the simple solution, it's just people sharing that experience. The simple solution might be just moving the bedtime forward slightly. Not always, there can be other implications as well. But for a lot of people, this is the case. It's not always like an insomnia disorder. Sometimes it can be changes to the circadian rhythms, and you can move your bedtime forward. Or what you can also do is, there are processes you can go through with a physician, with a doctor, or a sleep specialist, and you can take steps to actually change your circadian rhythm and move it either back into alignment of where you'd like it to be, or vice versa. So leading us on to that quite nicely, we'll talk about insomnia just now. Recently, by recently I mean 10 years ago, the criteria for insomnia was changed, or how we view it was changed. So it used to be thought that insomnia was just a symptom of something else. It was just a symptom of depression, or we had what you call primary and secondary insomnia. So primary insomnia was someone just had insomnia, and secondary insomnia was they had it alongside depression or alongside anxiety, or it was a psychological response to a stroke or to a cancer diagnosis or something else. So the idea then was that if someone had depression and insomnia, for example, if you treated the depression, the insomnia went away. And that didn't happen. The research suggested that wasn't the case. Often the depression would be treated effectively, but they would still have insomnia. So that idea that insomnia is just a symptom of something else was not evidence-based. And so sleep researchers and clinicians have now changed how we view insomnia, to understanding that it is its own diagnostic category. It's its own distinct condition. And it's comprised, so this isn't a very specific diagnostic criteria. This is kind of just to touch on it briefly. But generally, it can be difficulty with falling asleep, to be sleep onset insomnia, with staying asleep, so sleep maintenance insomnia, or with waking up too early in the morning. To meet diagnostic criteria, you would need to have, it would need to take you more than 30 minutes to fall asleep, or you would be awake throughout the night for more than 30 minutes to meet the full kind of diagnostic criteria. One important thing is as well is that it has to impact you throughout the day. So if you maybe don't get a lot of sleep at night, or it maybe takes you a long time to fall asleep, but it's not affecting you through the day, it wouldn't be considered insomnia disorder. So the point to take away from that is that insomnia is a 24-hour condition. It's not just difficult with getting to sleep. It can have a big impact on people throughout the day as well, on how well they can focus, how well they can perform with their job, as well as psychological impacts like anxiety and disruption to mood and things as well. To be classified as chronic insomnia disorder, it needs to occur at least 3 nights a week and have persisted for at least 3 months as well. And that's provided that there's enough opportunity to sleep. So it could be that someone they meet all the other criteria, but the reason that they're not getting to sleep and they're not staying asleep, for example, is that they have a young child, or they have a dog that jumps on them in the middle of the night. That then wouldn't be insomnia disorder, because there's something else that's causing that. In terms of prevalence, there's 2 different types of prevalence that we'll talk about. So we have what's called point prevalence. That is if we went out into the public just now and said, how many of you have insomnia? We would get that number. There's also a lifetime prevalence, and that's how many people are going to experience insomnia throughout their lifetime. There's not been a whole lot of research recently that's looked at the prevalence of insomnia, but the most recent research that we have suggests that it's somewhere between 6 and 20% of people will have insomnia right now. I expect COVID has perhaps had COVID-19 maybe had an impact on that as well, so it may be slightly higher. In terms of lifetime prevalence, it's about 1 in 2, 40 to 50% of people will experience chronic insomnia disorder at some point in their life. It's also more common in more common in women. Women are more likely to experience insomnia, but that could be because men are more likely to snore. So maybe they're just not getting enough sleep from their bed partner snoring all night. In terms of in a stroke, it's significantly higher, than the general population. So if we say about 6% of the general population will have insomnia disorder, about 40%, between kind of 32 and 40% of stroke survivors will have insomnia disorder. And this is people who have not had insomnia previously and have developed it after having a stroke. It's not necessarily clear why that happens yet. We're still looking into that, but we know that it's much more common in people who've had a stroke than in the general population. is likely an interaction between the location of the stroke in the brain, a psychological reaction to difficulties that people have post-stroke. Some people might worry about having another stroke, and that can contribute to insomnia as well. The anxiety that they feel around that, but it's still not exactly clear why it happens. It is unfortunately less researched than other sleep disorders, which is why we're looking into it. But conditions like sleep apnea, obstructive sleep apnea or central sleep apnea are very common after stroke, and they're looked at more often than insomnia. But there's a few of us, there's a few different research groups that's looking at post-stroke insomnia. And like I said, the reasons why aren't necessarily well understood yet, but there's probably an interaction of several different things. Humans are complicated. It's seldom the case that we just have one simple answer as to why something occurs. This is a very not nice to look at diagram, but I'll explain it. And it'll make sense when I come on to talk about some of the research that we are doing as well. So disruption to sleep in general, not just insomnia, but in general is very common after stroke. So most people, more than half of people who have experienced a stroke will have a sleep disorder of some description. And that's not to normalize it. That's not to say that if you have difficulty with sleep after a stroke, then that's it. That's what happens. It's not the case. It's common that it occurs after a stroke, but it's still something that should be investigated and that should be treated where possible. But despite how common it is, and this is a statistic from the US as well, less than or around 6% of people are offered formal assessments of sleep. I don't know if it's different in the UK. It's probably similar. So despite sleep being a big issue following a stroke, it's not investigated very often. And of those 6% who are offered a formal assessment of their sleep, only about a third of them actually complete it within 3 months. So not many at all. The point of this kind of diagram here is to show that there's a lot of different reasons as to why formal assessments aren't offered, and these include that there's not easy access to testing to assessments. It's unclear when it should occur, but the big thing is there's a lack of awareness, and that's in people who have experienced a stroke and in clinicians and doctors as well. There's a lack of awareness about sleep after a stroke and what is commonly the case and what should be the case, and how we should go about treating it, which is one thing that we're aiming to try and kind of alleviate. So one thing that we are doing is trying to improve how we detect insomnia after a stroke. The bad news is that it can lead to various unwanted outcomes. So you have if disruption to sleep after a stroke does bring about poorer post-stroke outcomes. Prior to a stroke, it increases the risk of a stroke. A very, very large study from China of 500,000 people over 10 years found that I think there was about a 10% increase in the risk of having a stroke for the first time if you had symptoms of insomnia. And it can increase the risk of a subsequent stroke later on. But as I say, the research that we're currently doing will hopefully improve this. The good news is insomnia responds very well to treatment. It's generally quite easily treatable. If it is treated, it can improve stroke recovery. So, I mean, sleep doesn't exist in a vacuum. Sleep, as we've discussed, affects virtually every process in the body. And if we can improve sleep, we can improve someone's recovery after a stroke. Physical, psychological, cognitive, generally all tend to be improved by better sleep. We can reduce the risk of another stroke. And we can reduce the risk of psychological disorders such as depression or anxiety, and reduce the risk of or it's associated with a reduced risk of physical disability as well. Also increasing the likelihood of someone returning to work after a stroke as well. So if you have disruption to sleep after a stroke, you're less likely to go back to work. So it's good for the individual, it's good for the economy, it's good for everyone if we can target sleep after a stroke and look to improve it. Interestingly as well, and this is an animal study, so it's never been, you wouldn't get approval to do it in humans, but the lovely scientists, I'm not sure where, gave a bunch of rats a stroke, which is awfully nice of them. And then some rats were permitted to sleep and some rats were not allowed to sleep. The ones who were not allowed to sleep, who were kind of kept awake, I think what happened is every time the rat kind of fell asleep, they would shake it and it would wake up on a kind of vibrating plate. The ones who were not allowed to sleep had larger lesions. The size of the damage in their brain was larger than the ones who were permitted to sleep, presumably because the brain wasn't allowed to repair itself, basically. So not not to keep beating the drum, but sleep is obviously important. Oops. So if it is easily treatable and it's obviously beneficial, and it's a good idea to do so, how do we go about treating insomnia?
How do we go?
Sorry, was that a question there? No. The primary treatment for insomnia is CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy. This is regarded as the gold standard, or what should be the first line of treatment. And this is endorsed by the European Sleep Research Society, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and the British Association for Psychopharmacology. Just to name a few, it goes beyond that. There's a lot more. Basically, everybody agrees that CBT-I, cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia, should be the first line of treatment for insomnia. Despite this, though, it's still commonly the case that more people are prescribed medication. This is not really advisable. They can be effective in the short term. The drugs do work. They do help you get to sleep. They don't tend to help you stay asleep, however, but they do help you get to sleep. But they shouldn't really be used for more than a couple of weeks. And the problem is when you stop taking them, you have the same symptoms again. You struggle to get back to sleep. They can also have unwanted side effects. So you have the risk of an increased risk of falls. You can have polypharmacy where they interact with other medications and you know what would happen, how they interact with them. So generally, they're not a bad idea for helping you get to sleep, but it shouldn't be a long-term solution. And what you should be looking at is getting some CBT. Unfortunately, there's been very few CBT studies that have explored treating insomnia after a stroke. There is a couple, I think two or three, that have experimentally looked at it, and they do suggest that it would be effective, but they also suggest that there needs to be some stroke-specific adaptations made. We'll talk about what CBT-I is, and it'll become clear as to why that should be the case. The other good news as well is if you can get in early enough, when someone begins to develop insomnia, and give them CBT-I, you significantly reduce the risk of them developing depression down the line as well. So not only can you improve their sleep, you reduce the risk of someone becoming psychologically depressed too. So CBT-I is comprised. It's not just one therapy. CBT-I is comprised of several different therapies. These include something that's called stimulus control, sleep restriction, sleep hygiene, cognitive therapy, and then sometimes relaxation techniques and things as well. There's also some that might add in aspects of mindfulness and things too. I'll go on and explain these a little bit more just now. So sleep hygiene is they're actually talking about changing the name of sleep hygiene to I think just healthy sleep behaviours, because there's a kind of connotation of dirtiness sometimes. So they talk about changing the name. As a quick disclaimer, I'll just say that all of the tips I'm giving you just now for sleep are generic. Everyone has their own rhythms, their circadian rhythms. Everyone has their own genetic build-up. Just as no two strokes are the same, no two people sleep are the same as well. So if you do have difficulties with your sleep, then you speak to your physician, and they would hopefully refer you to get some CBT-I if that's the right treatment for you. But yeah, we all have different times that we're wired to fall asleep at and wake up at. We all have different times that we need, different lengths of sleep that we need. We all have different sensitivities to caffeine as well. But in general, these are some rules that is a good idea to stick by. Firstly, regularity. Make sure you're keeping it regular. The little kind of joke on the side here is, well, you can't ruin your schedule if you don't have one. It's advisable to have one. Keeping a regular sleep schedule is one of the most important things that you can do, and this includes especially at the weekends. So it's not a good idea to be burning it at both ends through the week and not getting enough sleep and then try and catch up at the weekends. It doesn't work. your brain's not getting a chance to clear out the kind of waste products in the brain. It doesn't overcompensate from that at the weekends. You really need to have a schedule throughout the week that's the same at the weekends as well. And if you think back to those graphs that we looked at earlier, everyone has an optimal time for falling asleep and an optimal time for waking up that aligns with your body's circadian rhythms and your sleep drive. You want to be getting a sleep schedule that's close to that and stick to that schedule. Otherwise, you risk throwing your circadian rhythms out of whack and your drive out of whack as well. So the next thing is sunlight. This is a really, really cool one. So if we go back to thinking about evolution, in the back of our eyes, we have cells that are sensitive, photosensitive, easy for me to say, photosensitive glial cells at the back of our eyes, but more so on the bottom, which makes sense because we've evolved to light that comes at this angle, down the way. So if you can get out and get light early in the morning, within ideally just a couple of hours of waking up, that type of light, that kind of blue yellow light that we have at that time in the morning, depends on where you stay as well. In Glasgow, we're very high up in the northern hemisphere, so we don't get a whole lot of light at all in winter. But if you can get out and get enough of that in the morning, that sets your circadian rhythm strongly for throughout the day. So you're then telling your body, this is the morning, this is me awake. And that kind of light early in the morning is the type that our brain likes best when it's coming in at the correct angle. If it's raining and you don't want to this doesn't mean you have to climb up a hill at 4 o'clock in the morning. Just out for 5 to 10 minutes for a walk. If it's going out the back garden with the dog or something, it's going to be beneficial. If it's raining, or if you don't feel like going out, or if you have issues with mobility, or for whatever reason it's difficult for you to get outside, you can still do it by the window. Generally, the effect is kind of 50 times less, but it's still good. It's still better than nothing if you can kind of sit by the window. If you can't get out really early, you can go out later, but just for a little bit longer. So 5-10 minutes, if you can get out early enough, should be enough. But if you go out later on when the sun is slightly higher in the sky, or there's less sun, then just being out for longer can have a similar effect. And this really helps set your circadian rhythms to the point that you want them to be at. Again, exercise earlier in the day is not ideal to exercise later on, because you're getting yourself all kind of active and welled up and full of adrenaline, and then trying to go to sleep. But if you can do it early in the day, that can that can also affect your circadian rhythms too, and it can make it much easier to fall asleep later at night. One useful thing as well is having a wind down routine. So it can be taking some time just to set habits, turning lights off at a certain time, especially as we've discussed. We're most sensitive to light that comes in at an angle from above the head. So if in the evening, if you turn off all the overhead lights, and if you need lights, you can have them below eye level, and that will generally be better. But having a wind down routine, so you turn off the lights later in the day. For some people, it could be anything. It could be you read a book at a certain time, and that gets you ready to go to bed. You have a hot chocolate or something. Previously, I worked with people with dementia, and we had one lady who unfortunately had to go into hospital for a little while. She was fine, but she had to go into hospital. And for the first few days, she couldn't sleep at all. And the nurses and the doctors couldn't understand what was going on. And because she had dementia, she wasn't able to explain. And it was when her family came in and explained that she, every night before bed, would have a cup of tea and some toast. And once they gave her that, she was out like a light. But it was just that was her body was so used to, or her brain was so used to, I get my tea and my toast and then I go to sleep. And she'd done that for 60 years. So her brain wasn't letting her get to sleep until she had her tea and her toast. So it can be really useful to get into a routine like that. Having a slightly colder room as well, as we've said, you need to reduce your body temperature down to fall asleep. Avoiding alcohol as well is an important one. Alcohol has a massive effect on sleep quality. Some people will use alcohol to help them fall asleep, and it does help you fall asleep, but then what happens is the alcohol starts to wear off and your body starts to wake up, and the alcohol can really affect the architecture of your sleep. So you're not going to get enough time in each stage to have a restorative sleep. So you might get enough duration of sleep, but your sleep's going to be disrupted and you're not going to feel rested the next day. So the alcohol hasn't been a great idea because you've not had the restorative sleep that you need. Moving on, so the next, have I skipped one there? No, so sorry. The next part of CBT-I is called stimulus control therapy. The idea behind this is that certain behaviors or certain associations certain behaviors can be triggered by our associations that we have with things around us. So, for example, we could associate the bedroom with anxiety or with work or with stress, and then we're not going to get to sleep because we have negative associations with it. If we can break down those associations and change them so that your mind associates the bed and the bedroom with sleep, it's going to be much more conducive towards having a restorative night of sleep. If some people may have heard of Pavlov and his dogs, he rang a bell, and the dogs he trained them to salivate to the ringing of the bell because they knew they were getting food. It's a really old psychology experiment or study. It's a similar example of that. It's classical conditioning. Your mind begins to associate the bedroom with things that you may not necessarily want it to be associated with, and that doesn't help sleep. So some rules that we should follow is that you only use the bedroom for sleep or for sex. You don't read or watch TV or work in the bedroom if possible. I know that's difficult with a lot of people working from home now, but you should try and avoid that where possible. Because what can happen is for some people with insomnia, they may be sitting in their living room or somewhere, or they get home and they're exhausted and they're very tired. But the second they cross that threshold and walk into the bedroom, they're wide awake. And that's because they've made up these negative associations between the bed and not falling to sleep. Another rule is if you don't fall asleep within 15 to 20 minutes of going to bed, you should, if you can, leave the room and go and do something else, somewhere else. Read a book, something non-stimulating, until you feel tired again, and then you go back and try again. And the point of this is so that you're not lying in bed and tossing and turning and creating a negative association with the bedroom and not getting to sleep. Oops. Again, having a consistent rise time each morning, and if you can, try and avoid napping through the day. Now, this is one adaptation that might have been made for people with stroke, because fatigue and extreme tiredness for the day can be common following a stroke. So it might be the case that you feel like you need a nap. If that is the case, then just set an alarm and don't really have one for more than 20-30 minutes if possible. Or what some people can do is the caffeine takes about 30 minutes to kick in, so you can have a cup of coffee and then go for a nap. And as the coffee starts to kick in, you will then start to wake up, and that can kind of limit the time that you spend asleep, because you want to kind of save all of your sleep drive for nighttime so that it links up with your circadian rhythms if you can. Another adaptation for people with stroke is if you're struggling to fall asleep, if you don't feel comfortable leaving the room, you can have a chair next to your bed that's maybe slightly easier, or if you have real issues with mobility, you can maybe just sit on the edge of the bed. But the point is, you want that lying in your bed trying to go to sleep to be mentally associated with falling asleep with relative ease. Sleep restriction therapy. We'll just briefly mention this one. This is one that you should really do with a clinical professional. This is one of the most effective ways to improve your sleep. It's difficult though, it's very hard. It's similar to others. You should have the same wake time, the same go to sleep time. But the point of sleep restriction therapy is that you reduce the time that you spend in bed to the time that you spend asleep. So some people may be in bed for 9 hours a night, but they're only getting 4 hours of sleep, and the rest of the time is spent tossing and turning. So what you would do in sleep restriction therapy is you would find out how much time you spend in your bed. So say you spend 6 hours in bed, you would reduce the time that you're allowed to be in bed, the time that you're asleep. You reduce the time that you're allowed to be in bed to 6 hours, plus maybe 20 minutes, half an hour to allow for the time to fall asleep. And that's the maximum time you're allowed in bed. For the first week or so, people really struggle because it's hard and it's tiring. But it can be very, very effective. But it's best done with a healthcare provider, because they can slowly titrate up the amount of time that you spend in bed. But it's best to do with someone. It can be particularly hard for people if you've had a stroke and you feel really tired through the day. This can make that much harder. So there's some adaptations to be made there as well, if this is to be implemented in people who've had a stroke. Finally, the other thing that we won't really talk about is cognitive therapy. So that's if people have dysfunctional beliefs about sleep that don't help. If they're particularly anxious about sleep, you can work with a cognitive therapist and kind of have talking therapy to talk through these. And that can be useful as well. What we'll come on to in our research is we're interested in looking at doing behavioural therapy that doesn't have that cognitive part, because for some people with stroke, particularly if they have a cognitive impairment, they can find that really challenging. So we're looking to see how effective it can be if we don't use that part as well. Very quickly, caffeine. I'm not going to be the big bad man that tells you not to drink coffee, because I drink far too much anyway. But the truth is it blocks your sleep drive. So when we spoke earlier about the adenosine building up in your brain and telling you to go to sleep later at night, coffee blocks your brain from binding with that adenosine. So it gets in the way and it stops the adenosine communicating with your brain, which means there's kind of no point taking it really early in the morning, because you don't have any adenosine. So it's maybe good kind of mid-morning or early afternoon. But it has a half-life of about 5 to 6 hours, which means that if you drink coffee at midday, there's still a quarter of that cup that's in your system about 10 to 12 hours later, so around midnight. So it's going to impact your sleep. Everyone's tolerance is different. I'm very sensitive to caffeine. I can't drink too much, otherwise I can't sleep. My girlfriend could have a cup at 7 o'clock at night and she'll be asleep straight away. It doesn't really impact her that much. So you kind of have to work out for yourself. But generally, changing to decaf at midday is a good protocol, a good idea. And now I'm conscious that I've taken up quite a lot of time, but I'll very quickly just talk about the research that we're doing. I'll just run through this quickly and explain what kind of things we're trying to do to hopefully improve how we diagnose and how we can treat sleep or treat insomnia after someone has had a stroke. So the first study that we completed, which is currently under review, was what's called a systematic review. So that's where we take lots and lots of different studies that have been conducted by other researchers, and we kind of put all the findings together and get a much larger idea of what the whole body of research looks like, essentially. We wanted to look at this in stroke survivors, but unfortunately there was little to no research done. But given that there's the kind of positive linear relationship between age and your risk of a stroke, we thought that older adults were a suitable adjacent population to look at. But there was also enough research that it warranted being done in that population anyway. So we looked at what we spoke about there, specifically stimulus control and sleep restriction. So just those two components of CBT-I to try and see how effective they were at treating insomnia in older adults, so people over 60, we called that. We currently, it's currently under review in the Journal of Sleep Research, so we'll hopefully have that published soon. I won't go into too much detail. There was lots and lots of different outcomes that we looked at, but so just this is to say, fingers crossed we get it published soon. But the key takeaway is that there wasn't a lot of research done.
Everybody but me froze.
And determine whether or not that person then needs some support with their sleep. Rather than having to go through a very big comprehensive sleep assessment, this very, very brief one should hopefully, if we can validate it, be enough to improve how quickly we detect insomnia and how quickly we can get an intervention in to treat it. Finally, the study we're just about to start just now is looking at interviewing people who've had a stroke to look at the treatment preferences for post-stroke insomnia. So we want to recruit some people who have had a stroke and also have insomnia, and ask about what their experiences of sleep after the stroke have been, what meaning that has to them, how it's impacted their lives, and what their preferences for treatment are. because research suggests that people, and this research has looked specifically at CBT-I as well, suggests that people who find CBT-I or the components of it boring or annoying or difficult, they probably won't adhere to it, and they won't do it, even though it's going to benefit their sleep. So it's important that we have an understanding of what treatment methods people who have had a stroke are going to engage with and are going to follow through for it to be beneficial towards them, for their benefit, and also so that the doctors aren't wasting their time as well, so for everybody's benefit. And there's been explorations of how sleep has been disrupted after a stroke, but we've never looked at what an individual's preference for treatment is. So we are embarking on this right now. So this is a study that's underway right now. Our final project, I'm very aware of taking up a lot of everyone's time, so I'm going to quickly fly through this. Our final project is an experimental project where we're actually going to try a treatment. So we're going to develop an intervention. It's called brief behavioural treatment for insomnia. So it's an intervention that exists already, but we're going to adapt it for people who have had a stroke. And it works primarily with stimulus control and sleep restriction, as we spoke about. But it's only 4 sessions. It's only 4 weeks. It's relatively short. And so we're going to trial this in people who have had a stroke, and see how effective it is, how acceptable it is as well, and if people struggle with it, or if anything needs to be changed. And the hope is that this, being quite brief, will be effective and can hopefully really improve outcomes for people, not just with their sleep, but with their psychological well-being and their physical well-being following a stroke as well, is the aim. I'll very quickly plug this as well. We do have, I think I'll send a link to Ralph, maybe he could send it around everyone that's here today. The study I spoke about, we were trying to improve how we diagnose insomnia. We're still currently recruiting for that, so it's a very short questionnaire to complete. So if anyone was interested, we'd really appreciate the help of getting through that. So I'll send a link across, and if anyone wants to, they can take part. But very finally, thank you very much for your time. I know it's been quite a lot, and hopefully there's some time for some questions. And don't be like Tom, try and stick to a sleep schedule. So Tom from Tom and Jerry here, I've explained the importance of a good sleep. So please don't stay up at 3 o'clock in the morning watching YouTube videos. But thank you very much for your time. I will end sharing my screen now and come back to me. So thank you very much, and please fire away with any questions that you have.
Sure, thank you. I was going to ask about participants, but if you need them, I'll be happy to promote anything that you give me in the groups, so we can get you some folks for your study. A couple of reasons: you're sharing your knowledge with us, so I think it's important that we share our knowledge back with you. And the other thing is, it just might lead to something that helps all of us. That's one of the reasons we do this. Let's see. I have a question. It's actually more of an issue. And that is, in the stroke groups, you'll see lots of people, what do I do to get better? And they'll say sleep all the time. And then people say, I'm so tired, I can't do anything. And then everybody will come on and say, that's okay, it's your body telling you need more rest. And there are a lot of people that you never know what's going on with them, if they're sleeping at night or if they're not sleeping at night. They don't tell you all that kind of thing. But it doesn't seem to me, I never took a nap. I mean, that might be unusual, but I actually didn't want to. I saw a lot of people in the rehab hospitals sleeping their life away. So I was concerned about that. I did a lot of rehab, but what do you think about all this napping and all the people seem to be promoting the idea that you need to nap a lot as part of stroke recovery? And how's that? I know this is a tough question, And how does that, bounce off of like, having a regular sleep schedule, not getting insomnia, that kind of thing. It seems to me you're better off to like head towards what you're talking about, getting 8, getting your good 8, getting up in the morning, getting the light, getting your circadian rhythms in focus, and trying not to nap. But
yeah,
what do I know?
that would that would be my recommendation in an ideal world, and it would be best for everyone. The research suggests that you save your sleep, so to say, up for nighttime, and then you try and avoid napping. The unfortunate reality is that for many people with a stroke, they are so tired throughout the day that they do feel the need to sleep. So my advice would be, if you do feel like you have to sleep, just try and limit it to maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes to try and maybe get like a little sort of boost. Anything beyond that, and you're going to impair your sleep at night. And that's going to have a worse effect. Another thing as well is fatigue following a stroke is very, very common. And I think a lot of people, I don't know what the experience of people in the group is, but a lot of people might say that fatigue feels very different to sleepiness. So it's not necessarily that they're tired or that they feel like they need to sleep, but they still just feel really fatigued. And that kind of is exactly what you're saying, that your body is going through, or your brain especially is going through a major trauma. And does need a lot of time to kind of rejuvenate itself and repair itself. And the solution for fatigue is I guess not an easy one, because a nap may not help with that. I don't know if I have a great answer for what you should do then, but there is this distinction between feeling tired and feeling fatigued. They're not necessarily the same thing.
So if you have to nap, a nap after lunch would be better than one at 6 o'clock in the evening, which sounds like it is worse.
Maybe, yeah. So you have more time to build up some sleep drive before going to bed, yeah. But trying to limit it where possible. If you feel like you have to sleep and it's impairing how you can focus on your function and you just need a nap, then I'm not going to be the one to tell you not to, but trying to save it if you can for nighttime is a better port of call.
Well, and I know we're talking generalities, not specific cases. People tell you, well, I just can't make it. I'm so tired all the time. But I think one of the things is, like I said, you never know what's going on with them. If I had to guess, I'd guess they aren't doing a lot of exercise. Along with the napping, some of the other things that you're talking about, because exercise, I don't know, just gets you going. It gets me going anyway. I've always been a morning exerciser, and I've always found that, the first day you go to the gym maybe doesn't give you energy, but if you keep doing it, you actually get energy off of exercising. It's not something that costs you energy. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I would say exercise is, it was in your list. I would say it would be a key thing. So,
and the ideal thing is you can kind of double that up as well. You can go out early in the morning for a brisk walk, and you're getting your exercise, and you're also getting your sunlight that you need as well. So you can double up on these things and get a double whammy.
Yeah, if it's not January in Michigan or Scotland,
yeah,
so cold that you can't hardly walk. But that is a good idea most of the year. The other thing is, I try and tell people do a couple of exercise sessions, but I would definitely say do one in the morning, and then I guess I'll adapt my thinking towards. Well, you certainly wouldn't want to do it like after dinner or like right before you went to bed or anything. I would assume if you're going to do a lot of exercising, it'd be okay to do it, in the late afternoon, give you enough time to. Because we got a lot of people that are concerned about, well, I got to exercise a lot to get better. And then, you got a lot of people say, I'm tired all the time. And all these people come in and say, oh, well, just get sleep. You got to sleep to get better. Well, that may be true. And the brain needs time to heal, but the connections don't happen when you're asleep. The connections happen when you're exercising and doing targeted, therapy. So, I guess achieve, like a lot of things in life, you have to figure out how to achieve a balance that works for you.
Absolutely, yeah. And the recommendation would be to exercise earlier. Exercising later on in the evening or before bed could disrupt your sleep. But what you say is right. If you're then kind of relearning or regaining mobility and trying to retrain your brain to the areas that have been damaged, you do that through the day, and then it's consolidated at night if you prioritize sleep and you're getting good sleep for the night. It just further improves the gains that you've made through the day via exercise.
Interesting you said that, because one of my other notes was about consolidation. I have a pretty good idea of what it is, but I'm not sure everybody else does. Maybe should ask you to talk a little bit about consolidation and that whole process, because it seems like that's occurring in the evenings, that it's important that happen, because otherwise you're not going to be getting the benefit of the exercise that you did early in the day. So can you talk a little bit about the consolidation process and how it happens?
Yeah, there's different types of memories, and your memory works in different ways. So you can have things like procedural memory, for example, and that would be remembering how to ride a bike. And that stores slightly differently in the brain than an episodic memory, which is remembering a fact or remembering a date or a birthday or something. But those stages of sleep that we spoke about, so stage 3 and REM sleep, and the parts of sleep that are vitally important for taking that memory from kind of being stored in the short term, for being kind of kept on hand to remember if you need it there and then, and moving it into your long-term memory so that you can retain that memory for a longer time and then recall it later on if you need it. So if you have had a particularly bad stroke and have to relearn how to move your arms in such a way or move your body in such a way, because those connections in the brain have been damaged, and you're going through the physio to do it, and yes, you're building up strength in your muscles and you're working your muscles, but you're also doing that in your brain. Those parts of sleep, so your stage 3 sleep and your REM sleep, are the parts of sleep where your brain it's called consolidation, but really working to store that memory of how to move in such a way and how to control that muscle again, and relearn that. Those stages of sleep are important for storing that and really getting the benefit of the exercises that you've done earlier by confounding it with sleep.
So it's definitely a factor in establishing connections on a more permanent basis, not just like what your impression was of that movie you saw this afternoon.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, that makes it all the more important. I think a lot of the people that get into the whole napping thing, the other thing is you don't know what they're doing in terms of managing and maintaining a good sleep cycle. If you don't have a good sleep cycle at night, it doesn't seem to me like you're going to be in very good stead to make it through the day without napping. I know I rarely don't sleep at night, but I know that when I have trouble, I'm not up to par the next day. So if you got that going on day after day after day, that would be horrible. But that's basically what some people describe. So I think maybe the solution is to recommend that we try and answer questions for each other if we know the answer. So maybe the answer to that question is, you don't want to come in and say you don't need sleep, because all strokes are different and some people do need sleep. So you don't want to discount that, but I think the answer is in concentrating your effort on getting your sleep cycle back under control seems like it would definitely help with with reducing the need to nap during the day. I don't know, I'm just trying to apply logic.
And for some people, it may be the case, and there's not a lot of research that looked into this, but it may be the case that the location of their stroke in their brain has been a location of the brain that is important in regulating sleep. And so some of the tips I've recommended today may not be very useful for people who've had a lesion in the brain that's affected their sleep. And they may have to speak to their physician, and they may have to go through some different types of treatment and some different types of therapy. But prioritizing sleep, more often than not, should have a positive benefit, a positive outcome for anybody for a lot of different problems as well, but particularly for your energy levels and your focus and your concentration and things throughout the day, which people commonly mention is they have difficulties with.
Okay, come on, other folks. Somebody, I know you all have questions. Judy, all right, Judy, go. Oh, you're muted, Judy. You're still muted.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about magnesium and magnesium's effect on the body as far as sleep.
That's a good question that I don't have an answer to, if I'm completely honest. It's not something that I'm too aware of. Only speaking anecdotally, I don't know any research that's looked into it. I have spoke to other stroke groups, and people have mentioned that they've found the benefit of it from taking it and going to sleep, but that's only anecdotally. I don't know of any empirical studies, any actual scientific studies that have looked at it. The one thing I would mention, just to tack onto that, is about melatonin. So there is some evidence that melatonin can help with sleep if you were to take a melatonin supplement. But the issue is it doesn't seem to be very well regulated. I don't know if it's the same with magnesium. So you could be taking what you think is, I don't know what a regular dosage is, 10 milligrams, but the actual dosage you're getting is quite commonly within kind of 10%, 20% out of that. What you'd get in the pill is not often what you get, what it says on the bottle. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm afraid I don't have a whole lot of knowledge about what supplements can help. But yeah, so I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you.
I can chime in a little bit about magnesium anecdotally, which means non-scientifically, and that is that people have always taken, well, they used to take potassium more for jumpy legs syndrome, jumpy legs at night. Well, everybody who has a stroke, just about everybody I know who ever had a stroke had jumpy legs at night from spasticity. In fact, sometimes so annoying that you can't get to sleep. Or in like my case, I learned as soon as I could to sleep on my affected side, because that put weight on that affected leg and kept it from jumping around as much. When it was on the top, it was free to jump around. Okay, so some number of years ago, they started saying it was really potassium, I mean, magnesium, not potassium, that did a better job with jumpy leg syndrome. My ex-wife had it, and we started taking, she was taking potassium. She read about magnesium. She started taking magnesium. I read the article. I did too. I was 6 or 8 years out, and I wasn't having like the crazy keep you awake jumpy legs, but I still had some. And it definitely quieted it down somewhat. Did it get rid of it completely? No, but it definitely quieted it down somewhat. So I think maybe that, you know, and this is, you know, Ralph drawing his own conclusion again, as he often does, that, you know, if it helps with jumpy legs, and we have jumpy legs, and it cut down mine some, it seemed like it might for other folks also help with that whole part. Now, I can't speak at all about what it does in terms of, you know, putting you to sleep or allowing you to stay asleep. But that's one thing. If your legs aren't jumping around, you're more likely to be able to stay asleep, is one thing I found. So anybody else? Oh, Elizabeth, you changed your name to Liz. Good to see you. And Mike was showing us his cat. Anybody got any other questions, please?
I do.
Okay. Oh, of course. We can't hear you though.
Are you talking to me?
I thought you had a question.
Yeah. On his chart about stages of that REM, is there a particular time, the 4 stages, the non-REM versus the REM?
You mean the amount of time you spend in each, or the time
Yeah.
of the night that you should go into those? Like
Yeah.
you go into REM sleep?
Divide it up.
You may
Yeah,
not
we
sleep
don't-
long. Go ahead.
They don't. It would be good to be able to kind of control what stage you go into at what point and how long you want to stay there. But we don't have a whole lot of control over that, unfortunately. Generally, you spend much more time in stage 2. REM sleep, you spend very little time in at all. So when you're having a dream, when you're in REM sleep, sometimes your dream feels like it lasts for 4 or 5 hours. You have these really detailed, complex dreams that you think must have gone on for what feels like weeks, but you're only in there for a few minutes, for not very much time at all. So yeah, unfortunately, we can't kind of control at what point or how long we stay in each phase. It'd probably be really good if we could, in terms of treatment, for lots of different things. But generally, roughly each cycle kind of takes 90 minutes. So you'll spend within that 90 minutes a certain proportion of time in kind of not always stage 1, but stage 2, 3 in REM sleep. English psychopath. Sorry, was that another question there? Sorry.
No,
No.
I muted them. It was background noise.
Ah,
So,
okay.
okay, if you spend 60 to 90 minutes in each of the cycles, I was going to ask this question because we have some people that only sleep 4 or 5 hours a night. So it doesn't seem like if you're sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night that you're likely to get into REM sleep. I know I try and sleep 7 or 8, and I don't dream every night. I have those incredibly complex dreams that last for hours and hours, but apparently they're only minutes. So are you likely to get into REM sleep if you only sleep 4 hours a night?
You will, yeah. You're likely to at some point. It may be that you just, I mean, these 90-minute cycles of 4 or 5 times a night are kind of ideal. This is your ideal night's sleep. Everyone's is kind of different, and that'll be broken up by maybe you have to get up to go to the bathroom, or a noise happens outside, and that doesn't mean you're not going to have a good night's sleep. So that's kind of like the idealistic night's sleep. But generally, if you're just sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, you will get into REM sleep at some point. The interesting thing as well, so even if you wake up and you don't remember your dream, you will have had a few dreams, maybe 4 or 5 times, 3 or 4 dreams throughout the night. You may just not remember them. As a very strange segue, there's a very interesting study done recently, or interesting to me anyway, that looked at jumping spiders. So we were recently in Athens and we're presenting our research to other sleep researchers in Athens, and someone there was talking about a study that they've done where these jumping spiders have transparent eyelids, and so they just recorded them at night, and what they seen was kind of in the similar kind of cycles. They had bouts of REM sleep, so their eyes twitch from side to side. These tiny little, I'm not a big fan of spiders, but these were quite cute, and their eyes did flick from side to side. So it's a bit of a jump to say they're dreaming, but they're certainly having REM sleep. So it seems to be the case that, again, dreaming as well, we don't really know the reason for it. There's a lot of theories why, but that has existed throughout the entire animal kingdom for a long time too. And anyone with dogs or cats, or sometimes even birds, parrots, budgies and things as well, will testify that they will have periods of the night where their dog is dreaming, or their dog is running or whining, or something as well. So yeah, even a short amount of sleep, to kind of jump back, even a short amount of sleep, you will at some point go into REM sleep.
So if you're not getting long amount of sleep, your brain's reorganizing the amount of time you are sleeping so that you do get into all the stages and REM sleep.
You would generally have to be asleep, and I'm kind of getting into the realm of guesswork here, but you would generally have to be asleep for kind of 90 minutes to get into to go through a full cycle and get into to REM at some point. There was some theories a few years ago now, but I haven't heard much about them recently, where they were trying to work out if we could have less sleep by kind of trying to cheat the system a little bit by waking up at some point in one of these cycles. So you would say you'd go through 3 cycles, and then it would wake you up at that point. So you could arguably have less sleep, because the idea was if you woke up and at a different point, if your alarm went off and you're in deep sleep, you're going to wake up and not feel as well rested and a bit more groggy than if you woke up in light sleep. So there was an idea that you could kind of hack the system a little bit and say you wanted to have 5 sleep cycles or 4 sleep cycles. You would just go to sleep at 10 o'clock and times 90 by 4 or 5 or however many minutes you wanted to stay asleep for, and have an alarm set for that time. And you would just go through REM that number of times. I don't know, and I don't expect that it is good. It has positive outcomes. I think if you're maybe a 22-year-old entrepreneur trying to hack the business and you want as much time to be keeping busy and working as possible, maybe it has maybe there's some argument for it there. But for general health, I would optimize trying to get duration and quality of sleep if possible.
Way back when, yeah, I used to get like 5 hours sleep forever. I don't know how I did it, but anyway, if any of you don't know what a jumping spider is, you should Google them and look them up, because they're fascinating little creatures. I was gonna say they're smaller than a pea, but I mean, they're little teeny tiny things. They got eyes sometimes on top of spikes like some crabs. They're the most beautiful colors, and they can jump. They can jump like, I mean, they're like the size of a head of a pin. They have fabulous colors, and they can jump like a couple of feet. They're like ants. They can do things that for their size that they shouldn't be able to, nothing else on earth can do due to the lightweight.
And now you know they dream as well, apparently. So just one more amazing thing they can do to add to their accolade is they also dream. So
They also what?
Dream.
They
They
dream.
dream as well. Yeah.
How do they know they dream? How do you can't put electrodes on a jumping spider. I mean,
Well, that was that study. They could measure their eyes, and it suggests that they dream, and they seem to kind of the same as your dog does as well. When it's running and it's sleep, they kind of act out their dreams a little bit, and they twitch their legs at certain points. So we can't see what's going on in their head, obviously, but it suggests that they are dreaming.
well, what it suggests to me is it's a lot like the amygdala, the lizard brain, the fight and flight. There's these things, if they exist in jumping spiders, these kinds of things like the amygdala and those things that determine sleep patterns, they've been evolving all through all the various levels of sophistication of creatures throughout the eons. And otherwise, we wouldn't still have part of our lizard brain, would we? Or jumping spiders wouldn't be dreaming in REM sleep. So it's something that got worked out maybe long before us.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, interesting. I didn't expect to hear anything about jumping spiders. I'm a macro photographer. I like to take pictures of things you can't see with your eyes, and jumping spiders are one of the things that, well, it's so beautiful. A lot of people take pictures of them, and they're so small. Anyway, anybody who's interested in nature, look them up. Google image jumping spider. You'll be surprised how beautiful they are.
So
All right.
the question.
Okay.
If my bio clock is really off, like last night, I slept at 11:30 and I got up at 2:30. You know, I couldn't really sleep again. So you told me not to put on music and all that stuff, but that's what I did to try and fall asleep. Is that okay?
I would say no, and I'm saying this as someone who sometimes does also do the same. I quite like falling asleep to music, but I usually set a timer for the music to turn off. Generally, you would be disrupting your sleep playing music. I presume the reason that you would play the music is it maybe gets you out of your head a little bit. And is it that you're not able to fall asleep because maybe your mind's racing or there's lots of thoughts going on, so the music can be a kind of distraction?
I don't know what happened because I was sleeping and all of a sudden I just got up at 2:30 and I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't do that. So I quickly put on some calming music and I tried to fall asleep.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Sometimes, I mean, it could be the case if that's a common thing, waking up that early. It could be a case of, like you say, your rhythms have kind of moved forward, like a circadian phase advanced shift, it would be called. So your circadian rhythm is maybe slightly moved forward. And it might be a case that perhaps an earlier bedtime, if you're starting to feel sleepy earlier on, an earlier bedtime could be an idea. Or recommendation would be if you speak to your physician, there's different types of therapy that's specific to circadian disorders, but they're advisable to do with like a healthcare professional, because sometimes it involves staying up for a very long period of time to try and catch the cycle and bring it forward a little bit. Other times it can be you get the light exposure, you have the really bright lights, and you have timed exposure to lights, and that can help set your circadian rhythm to where you want it to be. But it's advisable to do that with a healthcare professional, or someone who knows what they're doing.
So when you said early, I have a feeling that was going to bed at, what'd you say, 11:30? That's earlier than you normally would go to bed, I presume?
No, I always go to bed earlier, but I'm always on my phone checking out my Facebook and my friends and all that stuff. So, I try and close down everything by 11:15, so I can go sleep at 11:30, but it doesn't always happen. It's like some nights I'm up to 12:30, 1 o'clock. It's like, it's terrible.
Yeah, there's the idea that the blue light from your phone is very bad for you, and blue light is not great. If you can get blue light early in the morning, it's good for you. It's because that's the time you want to have blue light. What seems to be more of the problem is how bright it is. So it could be the case that even maybe a little bit. I mean, I would say having it, because your phone's very close to your face, I'd say having it on at that time of night, 11 o'clock, is maybe kind of too late anyway.
I try and dim it down. I bring it down. But even at that, it doesn't really work.
Maybe try.
Dimming it is better.
I think the blue light experts will tell you to get off your phone at 9 o'clock if you want to go to sleep at 11:30. Or earlier than 11:15. I don't think 11:15 is enough. 15 minutes is enough time to. I'm not a blue light expert either, but I don't think 15 minutes is enough time. Billy's shaking your head. You guys.
No. Maybe she needs, like, do you ever hear of those ocean sounds? They have ocean sound recordings to help you go to sleep. Maybe she needs something like that instead of listening to music. Maybe like a sound, like a white noise, basically. I would think that would help her. But the telephone at night is not good because of that. You say the blue light, Ralph, and also they do have the blue light glasses, which may help. But I always suggest you stay off the phone, shut it off. Next morning you wake up, you take messages. Just shut it down.
It's kind of her world, when you're, I'm not picking on Winnie, but a lot of us, we have limited mobility. A lot of your friends leave you. I mean, a lot of times those are our major connections. I mean, this, Billy, because you live that same world life.
But if you want to sleep, you shut your phone off.
So you shut your phone off at 9 o'clock at night, or a couple hours before bed?
In the morning you wake up, you listen to who called you, and you call them back. If they don't answer, you say, okay, they'll call me back during the day. Otherwise,
I would say even a minimum as well. If you are going to be using your phone late, even trying to just avoid using it in bed, and maybe just using it, say you're in the living room on the couch, but you make the decision, okay, now I'm going to bed, I'm not going to touch the phone. Because when you're using your phone in bed, all of the things on Facebook or Twitter that are getting you excited or angry or annoyed, you're then associating that with your bed. Then you want your bed just to be, this is bed, this is where I fall asleep. One thing I didn't mention actually, so on the slide where we spoke about that on the stimulus control slide, there was a picture there of a man writing. That picture was of Roald Dahl, the author, and he had a shed at the bottom of his garden. This was his writing shed, and so he would only ever go there to write, and he would only ever write in there. And so he discussed how the moment when he walked through the threshold of that shed and sat down and began to write, he was in the zone. He knew, his brain knew exactly what to do. what we want to accomplish is for our relationship with the bed to be the same. We want us to walk through the door of the bedroom and the brain just to go, I know what to do. It's time to go to sleep. So we want to have the same association with sleep, and the bed is what Roald Dahl had with writing in his writing shed. Is the aim. So yeah, so maybe even if you do want to be on your phone later, I would recommend not doing so. But even if you want to, doing it in a different room and not doing it in the bedroom.
Or you get a flip phone.
Yeah, an old Nokia.
Yeah. Get a flip phone at night. And you're all set.
Okay.
No, not complicated.
Okay.
Billy's our philosopher.
Very simple. Keep things simple.
That's right. And nothing's under control.
Don't confuse yourself.
True. All right. Anybody else?
No.
Okay. Well, then I guess I'm going to thank you for
Thank you so much.
the presentation.